Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us. My name is Mike. I am a solutions architect with Megaport, and I'll be hosting this week's Tech Drop-In. And along the way, if there's any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we will go from there. I want to spend a little bit of time doing a quick overview of Megaport services, and I'm going to actually do show some actual diagrams of real scenarios, and then we'll spend a bit of time in the portal setting up some services on Megaport, including an Azure ExpressRoute and a Megaport virtual edge and a port. So let's go ahead and get started. So who is Megaport and what is our value? We are based in Australia. We have a 10-year history of delivering value for customers with network as a service. We have a very elastic and on-demand model. Services can be spun up very, very quickly, and we simplify the WAN. So our sales groups are composed of pods that has a sales executive, a solutions architect, which is what I do, and a customer success manager. And we meet with our customers on a monthly or quarterly basis, or as needed, of course, to review their accounts and talk about any strategic initiatives and any new products and initiatives that Megaport brings to the table. So, increasingly infrastructure is becoming diversified. 77% of Megaport connections terminate to public cloud, and 43 of those terminate to more than one cloud, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Megaport has a series of products that I want to walk you through. The first one is a port. It's a high efficiency, under the hood, it's a router connected to the Megaport network. And we offer 1 gig, but we don't offer as many of those as we offer much more 10 gig primarily. And we're seeing a huge demand in 100 gig ports. And you get a connection from a last mile connection, which I'll show you in a diagram, or a connection from a cage or rack within a Megaport enabled data center and connect to that via an Ethernet handoff over an optical interface. And that is a Megaport. That was our first offering. I don't want to say legacy offering but it is certainly our foundational access offering. Megaport Cloud Router is a virtual construct. It is a virtual machine that we support. We maintain it and update it as needed, but it is designed to be virtual, as in it doesn't need a last mile connection to a data center, and is primarily used for cloud to cloud routing. For example, maybe I have a West region presence in AWS and Azure, and I just need to migrate or share workloads between the two, and maybe don't want to hairpin back to a data center. And I'll show you what this looks like a little bit here on a map. And then the Megaport Virtual Edge extends that same compute concept. Think of our compute locations in roughly NFL cities here in the United States, but we have presence all over the globe, and they are close to major cloud regions. And the Megaport Virtual Edge leverages licenses of routing, firewall, or SD-WAN, and you install that license on our compute stack, and then you manage it through the orchestrator of that provider, but also in the Megaport portal. And it'll be clearer when I show you that if you're not already familiar with it. In terms of connectivity, Megaport has something we call a virtual cross connect, which is a layer 2 VLAN. So from a port or an MCR and MVE, I can create a VXC to a cloud provider to another Megaport, so I can bridge ports together across different cities, what we call data center interconnect. I can also connect to partners that may or may not, may know they're also on Megaport, and you can connect those together through a service key, and we'll talk about that. Megaport Internet, that's a newer product for us. You can stand up a basic internet connection from any of these services in a matter of minutes, and we do support BGP up to a /24. It's great as a primary or a backup, and our pricing is incredibly competitive, and we'll talk a bit about that. We also have an internet exchange product that we pair with IXs all over the globe, so slightly different than the Megaport Internet. And the marketplace is a whole ecosystem of partners that have services published in the marketplace, or sometimes they will privately hold those, but you can connect to them in a few different ways, but through a VXC, for example, port to port. And a lot of times they'll generate the service key, and then you enter the service key, and it'll give you the destination to their network when you enter the service key in our portal when you create the VXC. So we'll walk through some of this, and it'll become even more clear. So let's keep going here. All right. So hybrid cloud is the port. As I was saying, this could be an external network with a last mile connection to a data center where Megaport is enabled. And we have about 850 now data centers where we are enabled. And the port, as I said, is a router, and you get a cross connect from the Meet Me room to the Megaport cage, and then you provision that layer 2 VXC, for example, to the cloud. So Google, Azure, Amazon, or Oracle as examples. And we support all major cloud providers. And what that looks like in a slightly different way is this could be a last mile connection, or it could be within a data center. And this just shows the same thing in a slightly different way. But you get to the carrier meet me room, and then you order the cross connect. Once this port is established, that is, and the cross connect is delivered, that port is live. And you literally in our portal can download an LOA in a matter of minutes. So for people with a legacy telco background that are used to this process taking weeks or months, it really is eye-opening when you first see it. And we'll talk more about that. Cross cloud is that compute construct for the Megaport Cloud Router, or what we call MCR. And what you'll see here in the United States, like I was saying, NFL cities, is this is where we have compute locations for MCR and MVE, and they're strategically located in the South, in the Northeast, the Central U.S., Southwest and Northwest, and those are close to cloud compute regions, and we strategically put them there for obvious reasons. But the beauty of the compute platform is once you install an MCR or an MVE on the compute, you can link those together with a VXC, so you create a very meshed footprint. So I live in Denver, so as an example, we've got Iron Mountain, CoreSite, and 365 data centers that house the MVE. And that really brings up a larger point of one of the biggest value adds of Megaport is that we are not beholden to any one data center provider. We're data center agnostic. So we work with, like I said, CoreSite, Iron Mountain, 365, Equinix, Center Square, you name it. Globally, we have those relationships established. So it doesn't, you're not locked into any one vendor, and we can utilize that footprint globally. So, this is a very common scenario where I need to get to multiple clouds, but again, not have to go back to a data center. And we see this sometimes in an acquisition scenario where one company maybe is on Azure and need to move to GCP or AWS, or at least share the workloads. And we can install an MCR, and those are available from 1 to 10 gig. And we're working on higher speeds. They're actually in testing right now, 20, 40, and 100 gig. But the point being that if I acquired a company that was using Azure and I needed to get to Google or AWS, I could put that Megaport Cloud Router close to those cloud regions and move the traffic between it without having to go back to a data center. Virtual POP is the MVE concept. As I mentioned before, it's a Megaport virtual edge. It's a firewall router or SD-WAN stack. And we also see that get used as a cloud-to-cloud router. But what I am able to do is connect to the Megaport fabric without having to need a last mile connection. So I can use the internet SD-WAN to get to the Megaport virtual edge in a hub and spoke relationship. And I can use IPsec tunnels securely and then position those regionally, like I was showing you on the map, so that I'm a short hop to hop onto the network and I don't need, a physical connection. These are vendors that we support. We continually are expanding that, and I'll show you that in the portal. We recently added Aviatrix, and we expanded our Palo offering as an example. So this will be a continually evolving set of vendors that we enable for you to install, again, your license on our compute and manage it as though it were another endpoint in your orchestrator. Okay. The Megaport Virtual Edge comes in 4 different sizes, and this 2/8 to 1248, that means the number of CPUs or cores and the amount of RAM, so 8 up to 48 gig. And then with that comes internet transit. That's how your branch sites or your locations around the globe talk to the Megaport stack via internet transit. And we have Megaport management internet, and then we also have the data plane internet. And I'll show you that when we get into the portal. But we have the speeds from 20 meg up to 10 gig. This is an example of that mesh topology that I was talking about a little bit ago. So let's say I have a port up in Nebraska, but I have MVE compute in Chicago because this is close to my Azure and AWS workload regions, but also my branch locations, in the Midwest. Well, what I can do is, again, with a quick hop of internet, I can get to Megaport, MVE, and I can connect those sites to the cloud, and I can do it in a meshed fashion. But I can also tie them back to ports. So it regionalizes that in a nice way. And then these are the layer 2 VLANs or VXCs that are connecting these together. So I have a Northern California footprint. I have offices in Oregon and in Nevada and SoCal, and I link them together with a regional MVE footprint and then tie those back to a port, like I said, in Nebraska, and then down in Dallas, where I also have a regional footprint in the Texas area, and I can get to all my various clouds and mesh these together. All of these endpoints have very predictable latency. So from Denver to Omaha to Northern California, San Jose, to Chicago, we know exactly what that latency is. We publish it monthly on our website. And under the hood, this is a fully meshed network. So you have a completely resilient, redundant fabric. Okay. Global WAN as a service is really exciting because what you're able to do is order MCRs and ports and MVEs around the globe and tie them together through a global backbone. I've been focused primarily on the United States, but our footprint extends across the Atlantic and Pacific. We have an extremely robust backbone so that you can connect these together and get rid of disparate MPLS networks. And I'm going to show you an example of that when we get into a diagram that I'll show you. But it's nice because we can build these data center interconnects or VXCs between MCRs, and you can completely mesh those networks together and get out of expensive contracts. So we can talk more about that as well. So with that in mind, I'm going to get out of here and let's go into the Megaport portal. You know what? Actually, we're gonna go into diagrams and then into the Megaport portal. So the base offering, as I was showing you before, would be a Megaport port. This is in Chicago as an example. And let's say that the customer wanted to get to Megaport in Equinix CH4, 350 Thermac. And let's say maybe they're in Oak Brook, Illinois, as an example. They would get a carrier transporter last mile connection to diverse Megaport ports. In many of our data centers, we offer resiliency or redundancy in what we call red and blue zones. So if we're ever doing a maintenance, we're never going to take down a red and a blue zone at the same time. We don't do maintenance all the time, but we need to do it periodically to keep firmware and software updated. So for a short duration of time, normally a couple of hours, these ports will go out of service. So in this scenario, what we've done is created a red and a blue zone port, 10 gig a piece. Oh, there, yeah. Yep, those are 100 gig ports, pardon me. And we built it in a redundant configuration. And then what we did was actually split the Azure ExpressRoute across each port. Azure offers an SLA to two distinct Azure routers on their fabric. And by building it in this configuration, we built two VXCs to the Azure cloud, and it satisfies the SLA and maintains that redundancy, but also has the redundancy and resiliency for when we perform a maintenance. So this is really a kind of a textbook example of a basic port setup in Chicago as an example. This is an example of a customer doing a similar setup in London and DC where they're connected to redundant ports, but we're also actually connected to the Megaport cloud router. And this gives you the ability to not have to hairpin all the way back to a router at your prem. It allows you to move between Azure and AWS just using the MCRs. And we've got this again in a redundant configuration. And we split our hosts to connect and express routes across each one. And then, like I said, if we need to, we can always tie a VXC back to a port. This is another fairly common example of a Megaport deployment. And then MVE, of course, is that using that last mile connection over your existing internet rather than a dedicated pipe to a Megaport enabled data center. So you can create these IPsec tunnels through the internet, through that transit that I was just describing a little bit ago from 20 to 10 gig, and I can connect those MVEs through the transit to the internet. So that's ultimately how these all talk to each other. And then, of course, build those layer 2 VXCs, hosted connect and ExpressRoute in this case, to the clouds. So this is a nice meshed architecture. We can clearly move between Chicago and DC if we need to. Again, a fairly common deployment of a Megaport system with red and blue diversity throughout. All right. The last one I want to bring your attention to is that global WAN concept. This is actually a live customer, names redacted, of course, but they have a presence in Denver, and DC and Toronto and London, and they needed to connect to Google Cloud, and they wanted to do each cloud region independently, but also meshed so that they had a completely redundant setup for uh, 4 different regions. So 3 in North America, of course, and 1 in Europe. So what was unique about this is they had MPLS contracts through different providers, but they were disparate networks. So trying to combine those together is a fairly arduous task. So what they were able to do is actually take their spend and allocate it towards last mile connections to get to Megaport enabled data centers. And then in this case of Colorado, they actually had a cage presence. So the customer routers are actually located on site. But for the rest of these other 6 sites are remote locations where they procured fiber from these providers and then connected to 8 different megaports with meshed VXCs going to the cloud and also to each other. So this is a cool setup, and this is something we're seeing more and more of as well. So now, with that in mind, I want to go into the Megaport portal and sort of tie all of these slides and diagrams together. So this portal allows you to provision services globally with the exact same look and feel. I stood up an MVE a little bit ago just for demonstration purposes, and we'll walk through setting one of those up without fully deploying it. But I want to walk through what it looks like to set up a port and an MCR and an MVE very quickly. And then what we'll do is we'll tie the MVE into an Azure ExpressRoute that I have set up, and that will wrap us up for today. Okay. So with the radio button here on the upper left-hand side, I'm going to click on Create Port, and I'm going to go ahead and just sort on Denver because that's where I live. And I'm going to grab a port in Denver core site, which is downtown 910 15th Street. I'm going to go ahead and select a 10 gig port, although 100 is available. And I'm going to go ahead and choose a term. Now, a port is 600 without a term and 450 for a 3-year term. And we can talk to you more about the pricing. There is diversity as an option in that data center. So if I wanted to create a diverse pair out of the gate, I could go ahead and do that. And I'm just going to leave that alone for now. But if you're interested in diversity, it's always the best practice to set that up on the front end. And I can lag ports together. I could lag up to 8 ports together to create an 80 gig handoff, and it would require, a separate cross connect for each one of those ports. The break even from going from 10 to 100, by the way, is about 4 ports. So if you're thinking of something in excess of 40 or higher, I should say, you're better off just starting with a 100 gig port because the price of 100 gig is exactly 4x what a 10 gig is. And so we're seeing more and more of those 100 gig ports as people are increasing their bandwidth to the cloud in particular. So with that said, I'm going to go with 10 gig. I'm just going to go month to month, and I'm going to go ahead and click next and then add port. And I'm going to go ahead and order that while we go through, but because I want you to see how quickly an LOA is generated. And as I was indicating before, once that cross connect is established, that port is live and services can be provisioned. I can go ahead and create connections. So as an example, if I wanted to connect to the cloud, I could come in here and put in my Azure ExpressRoute information and create an express route from the port. And I'll show you that here in a little bit through the MVE. I could also do the same thing with a hosted connect. For those of you who are familiar with the legacy offering of a hosted VIF was the first construct that they launched, and it can be from 1 to 5 gig, and it can be uh, moved up versus the hosted connection, which can be from 50 meg up to 25 gig if the NNI is available. And it can't be increased because that bandwidth is restricted. But you can see as an example, if I wanted to go from Denver to Phoenix, for example, it would take me about 20 milliseconds, and I could go ahead and build that port. And let's just see, if I put in a rate limit of, let's say 10 gig, then you could see that would be about 1,500 a month. And I could establish that hosted connect and then finish configuring that in the Azure portal, right? So that's a port. And while this is waiting for resource allocation, I want to walk you through another couple of ways we can connect. Let's say you were doing business with a partner that you knew was on Megaport, that maybe it was an acquisition or it's a company that you are going to do business with, and you know that they're a Megaport customer. Well, what you can do is connect to them and you can actually create a service key, and this will create an encrypted key that you can send to them, and then they can build a private VXC to Megaport, and the only destination that will be available when they do that is the port or is the key that you create. So it creates that secure connection using a Megaport VXC and instantly, connects those networks together on a permission-based basis. So very powerful. The other thing you can do is connect to a marketplace customer, and you could do that here. And let's say, for example, you wanted to connect to Cloudflare, and we're seeing a lot of traction there. So Cloudflare has ports all over the world, but as an example, in the United States, Chicago, Dallas, San Jose, Seattle, etc. So you can initiate a conversation with Cloudflare. They would give you a service key. You could come into the Megaport portal and you could connect to them at wherever you designate around the country or globe that you want to connect. We also can connect to the internet, which is what I was talking about a little bit ago. So I could connect to Megaport internet. Since I'm in Denver, I'm on a red zone port. We'll connect to a red zone of Megaport internet. And then just to give you a sense for what the pricing looks like, 100 meg is about 180. A gig is 240. And this is month to month, by the way. And 10 gig is 798. So really compelling prices. Compelling prices for sure. Now, the Megaport internet has diverse providers per market, and that's all hidden to you. So when you stand up a connection to our providers, there's actually two, and the failover is automatic. So some resiliency is built into the product out of the gate. Okay. So with that said, you'll notice that the LOA is already available for downloading. The first time I saw this, I really was incredibly impressed at how quickly that's done. Then you go ahead and grab this LOA. It's got the Meet Me Room assignments listed right here. And then once that's, again, established, that port's live and you're ready to pass traffic. So pretty neat when you explore that. So now let's look at an MCR, again, part of that compute construct. And these are the locations around the globe. Let's just look at Denver as a potential place to create it. And we'll go create MCR. And I'm going to go with Denver core site again. And let's look at that. Now, as I mentioned before, it's currently 1 to 10. We are in pilot with larger speeds. But let's go ahead and just look at a 2.5 gig MCR. And you can see that it's 900 on no term. If I went up to 10 gig, it's about 2,400 with no term. But let's just stick with the 2.5, give you a sense for that. Now, every Megaport MCR has this AS number, which is the default. You, of course, can change it, but this is the A end of the BGP pair that you would use to connect to cloud providers. It supports static routing, and sometimes what we'll see is somebody will static route to an MCR, but the cloud providers all require BGP, so just know that that's the case. And then, of course, I could add my MCR and then use that to connect to the cloud, a port, or an MDE as well. So this is how quickly these services are stood up. They can be stood up in minutes. All right. Now, lastly, I'm going to set up a Palo Alto firewall MVE. And what I'm going to do is put that in Denver, and I'm going to select Iron Mountain. And I'm going to look at the red zone. So there's blue and red, those diversity zones that we talked about for maintenance. And let's go ahead and grab that. Now, these are all of the vendors that we currently support. So you can see 6Wind, Aruba, Aviatrix. We've got Cisco 8000V, but we also recently added Cisco FTD. We've got Fortinet. We've got Meraki in a pre-release mode. Palo, Prisma SD-WAN we recently added. We've had Palo Firewall for a while. VMware, formerly Velo, we've got that, and also Versa. So a nice selection of vendors. So I'm going to grab the Palo VM series. And what I want you to see is the sizes that are available that I showed you in the presentation are from 2 core and 8 gig to 12 and 48 gig. So we'll just choose a small version. And I'm going to create a password so that if I need to get into the box, I can. And I'm going to grab an SSH key and put that in just so you can see where it goes. Okay. And then I want to go ahead and set up the sub interfaces or VNICs on this. So it supports up to 5, and this can support 25 VXCs on the device itself. And so the first one we reserve, VNIC 0, is reserved for management. Then we have data plane, and then I'm going to add some additional ones. So maybe I want to create an HA pair. I'm going to add maybe one to connect back to a prem. And then I just want to keep another one on standby just in case I need an additional VNIC. And I want to set these up. These names can be changed, but they have to be provisioned at the time you set up the MVE so that they're ready to go. And then you can see I've got 840 a month on again on that 2-core. And if I change it, obviously it goes up in price. So if I click next, we can go ahead and add MVE, but now it's going to ask me, do I want to add the internet? And I'm going to say yes. So let's go ahead and grab Red Internet out of Denver, and we'll click next. And since I'm going to be using this on the management, I just want to designate it again so there's no confusion. Okay. It's on the management plane, and let's just do a minimum internet of just 20 meg in case I need to get into that box. And then you can see it's 120 a month or 90 on a 3-year term. So I can add that VXC. And then now I want to add the data internet or how it gets to the sites. Remember in my customer example, I was talking about how there's branch locations, and this is how they're going to connect is over this data plane. So we'll go ahead and add that. We're going to add the internet again. We're going to go to that internet transit hub, but this time we're going to ensure that it's on the data plane, and I'm going to assign it here on that VNIC. And we're going to do, let's just do a gig, for example. And you can see a gig of internet on no terms, about $240 a month. And go ahead and click next and add. So now all of these services are ready in my shopping cart that I can go ahead and provision. Because I want this to, it takes a few minutes for these to deploy when I have to set up an MVE because we have to build the resource and then we have to tie it back to whatever cloud that, or pardon me, provider that we've designated. So in this case, I've got this one created, and I want you to see that ultimately how we're going to connect to this is to go to, this has been provisioned, and you're going to see I'm on the management interface, and I'm going to go to details here. And then this is the IP that will allow me to get into it to get to PAN. Okay. So then what I want to do is come up here and enter that IP address in. And then what happens is it takes me to Palo Alto, and it'll take just a minute to come up. And when I do, I'm going to enter in that password that I created in the portal, and I'm up and running. So there's 2 panes of glass. This is the Palo orchestrator, but ultimately what it's doing is talking to this MVE that's living on the Megaport stack. So it's just an extension of your network, but you're going to see it in 2 panes. But it's still a very convenient way to leverage a firewall stack to get to Megaport without, again, needing a dedicated last mile connection. So with that in mind, I want to wrap it up quickly. I know we're almost out of time, showing what it looks like if I wanted to connect an Azure ExpressRoute. So I created this one previously to get to West US, which is in California, from Denver at 50 meg. So when I go ahead and build that out, I'm not going to walk through it because we're tight on time, but it creates an API call back to Megaport once we've done this. And then what I'm going to do is grab this service key, and I'm going to go back to the Megaport portal off this MVE that I created. And now I want to build that express route. So what I do is I come into Plus Connection and I go to Cloud, and I scroll down to Microsoft Azure and I drop the service key in. Now what's going to happen is that because that API call was made and the destination is predetermined, it's going to show me a destination port in Denver to get to the Azure on-ramp. So what we mean by that is you're going to leave Megaport and hop on Azure in Denver, And we like to do this as a best practice because you get a Metro VXC, which tends to be smaller and gets you on the Azure backbone faster. So I go ahead and click next, and I'm going to assign that to the data plane, right? And we'll just do MVE test. And we're going to call this at US West ER number 1 for my primary. And the speed is already populated at 50 meg. And I'm going to go ahead and call this from the AN side, VLAN 200. This is my side. And then I'm going to map that to an Azure VLAN of 100. And that's really hidden to you. But the point is that we make that translation. And once I go ahead and create that and order it, it's going to provision an ExpressRoute. And then I can come back in and I can build another one, the second part of that Azure ExpressRoute for the SLA. And I do the same thing. And I drop the service key in. And now I'm going to choose the red zone once it populates. Okay. And there you go. So you can see that's how quickly we can stand that up. I would create VLAN 201, map it to the Azure VLAN of 100, and now I've got the express routes built. And then once that's completed, you'll be able to come in and finish configuring your BGP with your AS numbers and your routing here. So I know we're 1 minute over. I'm going to stop sharing right there and see if there's any questions in chat. It I don't believe there are any. So with that in mind, we're going to let you go and hope you have a great weekend and hope you can attend another Tech Drop-In.